Hi friends, welcome to the channel. My name is Nina and this is Pandora, and together we are Stitching with Kitten, a channel about cross-stitch and other crafts as well as my cats. Join us in the journey to do all the things. Hi friends, welcome to the first video, which is always the weird and awkward one. In this video, we will have some introductions, my 2023 WIP Parade, and what I'm currently doing in January. This will include my focus pieces and finishes. Finally, I will end with a segment I am calling Projects from the Past, in which I will share a few past finishes starting with 2018, and we will work our way forward until I am caught up. Okay, so introductions. My name is Nina. I was born to German parents in Germany, and in the late 70s we immigrated to the United States, and I grew up in Reno, Nevada. I'm currently in Indiana with my husband and my cat children. I am a stay-at-home wife and cat mom, and I have autism. I started stitching in the 90s when my mother first got into cross-stitch, but I kind of fell out of the hobby since I was still going to school. I was studying graphic design. Some of my hobbies include knitting, crochet, quilting, and reading. So now, fast forward 25 years. In 2018, a high school friend of mine told me she was working on a cross-stitch piece, and at the time, I was a prolific knitter, but I still had all of my DMC from the 90s. So I hauled out my old scroll frame, you know, the kind you sew your fabric to. It still had a piece of Aida cloth on it, and my oldest surviving WIP, which I will share with you another time. I quickly realized that DMC had added a ton more colors, and I didn't have any stitching patterns on hand. Later, I would find a few old patterns, which I will also share with you in a later episode. I didn't realize how the stitching community had grown until I found Flosstube. I also realized I had some catching up to do. I didn't know there was so many different types of ground cloth or over-dyed flosses. I am also a multi-crafter, and from time to time I will share some of my other stuff with you, but the main focus of this channel is cross-stitch. Now, my co-star, or co-host of the channel, is Pandora, and as you can see, she's not a kitten, nor are the other two. But one of Pan's nicknames is Kitten, and before Bane passed, she would sit with me while I stitched. Since then, and after we rescued Aramis and Eiley, she stays in her window. Pandora is 14, and the other two are pandemic kittens. We got them in January 2021. Aramis does sit with me when I stitch, and he usually manages to get his head in the way, trying to help me. 2023 WIP Parade. It's the year 2023, and I thought perhaps it's time for an actual WIP Parade. So my first WIP, and also my new start for the year, is my temperature bookshelf. The pattern name is Bookshelves Daily Temperature Blackwork by Peppermint Purple, who has an Etsy shop by the same name. You can also find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. I am using 20 count white Aida, which I got from 123 Stitch. And I'm using Victorian Motto floss and a few of the called for DMC. I am only recording the highs of each day and plan to stitch the whole week on Sundays throughout the year. Next is the only WIP left that was carried over from 2022. Florence Mary Dickinson by Hands Across the Sea. This is a shop exclusive that Hands Across the Sea did with Hobby House Needleworks in Pittsford, New York. The photo is from their Instagram page. I called them when I first found out about this chart from Brenda and the Cereal Starters Flosstube and asked if they would ship it to me. They were super friendly, and I received the chart quite quickly. I am using the called for Auvers Soie d'Alger, and the fabric is 40 count Zweigart linen in the color flax, which I got from 123 Stitch. Now, Zweigart is my most favorite linen to stitch on, and 40 count is my preferred count of fabric. However, I do like to stitch on all types of ground cloth. Moving on to the WIPs from 2021. Which there's also only one. In 2021, I decided to focus on Blackbird charts. I only ended up starting 4 or 5 of their charts and managed to finish all but this one. This is the Anniversaries of the Heart by Blackbird Design. It was sold in 12 parts with 2 bonus charts that you could either stitch as a separate piece or, as I am doing, as one large piece. I am using 40 count Zweigart linen in the color Woodland. I purchased an 18 by 27 piece from 123 Stitch. I am using a mix of color and cotton, Victorian motto, and overdyed flosses. The idea here is to add loved ones to each month, either for birthdays, anniversaries. January is dedicated to my sweet boy Bane, who I lost in June of 2020, in the middle of the lockdown and pandemic. February is dedicated to my aunt, born on leap year. She's my father's sister. March, I plan to put myself, but my cousin, my husband, his mother, and his mother-in-law are all in March. So I am still trying to decide how I want to do it. Next is the year with the most carried over WIPs. The year we all started all the things. I will list these in the order that they were started. First up is Anton Uffendale, 1835, from Hands Across the Sea. Mine is the reprint they did in 2019, and at that time, she and her sister were my unicorn charts. Anne is on 40 count Zweigart in the color Country Mocha, and I'm using the called for DMC for her. Next, we have Shushi by Landmark Tapestries and Charts. I have a bunch of these charts. I first heard about them from Caroline from Friday Off the Grid. I'm using 25 count Mushroom Lugana, stitching 1/1 with the called for DMC flosses. Next up is Consider the Lilies by Heartstring Samplery. The fabric is 40 count Zweigart linen in the color Birch. I am using the called for overdyed threads. I do have his eye on the sparrow and will use the leftover fabric and the called for overdyes from Lilies. No plans for when I will start his eye. Then we have Pandemic by Long Dog Samplers. The fabric is an 18 count Aida. Sadly, I could not find the tag for this, so I am unsure if this was a fabric that I hand dyed or one that I purchased. The floss I am stitching with is Sulky 12 weight cotton thread in the color Ocean Blue. I bought 4 spools with 330 yards on each. I enjoy working with the Sulky threads. As you can see, there's not a lot of progress on this. I was stitching in hand on this, trying to practice. I usually stitch with a scroll frame and a stand, but I wanted a piece I could easily take with me for travel or waiting rooms. And that seems a bit ironic since the pandemic had shut everything down and we were all stuck at home. Here's the only dimensions kit that I have currently. It's called Cozy Cove. I'm using the included 18 count Aida, which is in the color Ivory, and with the threads that they also included with the kit. What makes these so unique is the use of different amounts of thread in select areas. However, this also makes these take so much longer, and you want to have at least 2 different size needles with you. I use size 24 for the areas that use 3 strands or more, and I use a size 26 needle for the regular 2 strands. Here's another WIP that I started but then set aside for whatever reason. It is America Land We Love by Jean Farish. I am stitching this on 32 count Vintage Stormy Night Lugana with Victorian motto flosses. It is the smallest of starts. Next up in the year of Start All the Things is Shine On Sampler. And this is by Bonnie and Camille in their book called Quilting Bee. I'm using the called for Cosmo Floss on 25 count Potato Lugana, and I'm stitching this 1/1. The last WIP started in 2020 is Prim Stitch by Lori Holt. This was a monthly club through the Fat Quarter Shop. They would ship out once in each month. and they ran a stitch along. I joined late to this club, so they sent several patterns the first month. I am using 18 count Ada in the color Dirty, and I'm using Victorian model flosses that I converted from the called for threads. I was in the floss club for Victorian motto for over 2 years, so I have a large stash of these flosses. I'm also placing the patterns in different order and deciding to make 3 rows of 4 versus 4 rows of 3. Now we move to the oldest WIPs that have been languishing. The only excuse I have is that I seem to enjoy BAPs, and for those who are unfamiliar with this term, it stands for Big Ass Projects. I love the satisfaction you get from finishing a small or normal size piece, but something always draws me to these big projects. So with that in mind, here is the first WIP of 2019. This is the Scotland mandala. It's a chatelaine design by the late Martina Rosenberg. These pieces are usually full of embroidery stitches, or as most call them, specialty stitches. They tend to use a lot of different kinds of threads, including silks and krynic, and they're usually always covered in beads. These kits tend to cost quite a bit and take a while to complete. I am using a 32 count Lugana in the color cream, with the called for beads and most of the called for threads. I did convert a few of the silks because at the time that I started this, silks were a bit out of my budget and some of the other specialty threads were a bit intimidating. I started this in March of 2019 and worked on it for the whole month. I have done several Mirabilia and Nora Corbett pieces since then, and as you know, those are also very bead heavy. And since I'm a glutton for punishment, I also decided I wanted to start a Heaven and Earth design, better known as a HAID. This is Midnight Vigil by Lisa Parker. I am using the called for DMC on 25 count Easy Count Grid Lugana. I have Pattern Keeper on my Kindle that I use to hold my digital pattern as well as marking the stitches. It's been a while since I've worked on this. Next up is Jane Bannister by Hands Across the Sea. She was the first sampler that I fell in love with after the Uffendale sisters. I am using a piece of 40 count vintage exemplar linen from Lakeside Linens, and the threads are a conversion that my husband and I did together while at the local stitchy shop. We used the DMC called for in the pattern and then went around the shop converting them to overdyed flosses. Both of us had so much fun doing this, and it makes Jane so much more special. I probably should have waited to start her, but I couldn't help myself. And finally, the last WIP of 2019, as well as the last WIP of the parade, is Shores of Hawk Run Hollow by Carriage House Samplings. I am using the called for NPI silks, and the 40 count fabric is from Silk Weaver in the color Golden Oats. I got this piece from Sassy Jack Stitchery. I plan to move the squares around a bit in a different order, and I might leave 1 or 2 out altogether. I haven't decided yet how I want to do it. Here's what I am currently working on for January 2023. Each month I decide what I want to set as a focus piece. I usually choose at least 2 to work on, that way I don't get bored. This month, I had set both Winter Quilt and It's Snow Time as my focus pieces, with hopes of also working on March for Anniversaries of the Heart, since that piece had been neglected for quite a while. I also listed Prim Stitch in case I was super successful and managed to finish all the others. And of course, you already saw all these in the WIP Parade, so I will just do a quick recap. Here's the first finish of the year, Winter Quilt by Stony Creek. It is on 25 count Stormy Clouds Lugana, stitch 2 over 2. I am using the called for DMC threads. I decided to do 2 over 2 on 25 count to make the pattern a larger finish. I love stitching season pieces, and I have all 4 of these patterns from Stony Creek. This one took me a while because it uses a lot of colors and there's a bunch of confetti stitching. The second finish this month is It's Snow Time by Cottage Garden Samplings. It's the #1 in a Time for All Seasons series. I am using the called for fabric, which is a 40 count ancient by Picture This Plus, and the called for DMC threads. The final segment of the episode is Projects from the Past, where I want to share with you finishes that are framed or fully finished into pillows or flat folds. Each new episode, I will share just a few finishes until we are caught up. Finishes from 2018. The first project that I worked on when I returned to stitching was the summer sampler from Satsuma Street called Verano. I started and finished this in May of 2018. I used a piece of 14 count Aida in the color Ivory that I had left over from my stash from the 90s. I used the called for DMC variegated flosses, which I love so much. The colors are so pretty. I purchased the frame from Amazon. After that, I was hooked. On stitching, I wanted to do all the things. I went back to Satsuma Street's Etsy shop and bought the other 2 seasons that were out. At the time, she was still working on winter. I stitched on the spring sampler called Primavera right after the summer one and finished it in August of 2018. To keep them all cohesive, I stitched spring on 14 count Aida in the color Oatmeal that I purchased from Hobby Lobby. I used the called for DMC and again framed it myself. The last one I will share with you today is the fall sampler called Otono. I finished it in November of 2018, and it is also stitched on 14 count Aida in the color Oatmeal. I had purchased this from Hobby Lobby, but sadly it turned out that it was not an even piece, and my piece turned out a 1/4 inch shorter from top to bottom than side to side, which I didn't realize until I went to frame it in a 10 by 10 frame. That was the last time I purchased fabric from Hobby Lobby. I hope you enjoyed my first video and the 2023 WIP Parade. I will try to make sure to leave links to shops and floss tubers that I mentioned in the video in the drop down below. Right now, my plans are to make at least 1 video a month to share my stitching journey. Thanks for watching, and until next time, start all the things. Bye!